It's Sam. There you go. Thank you. So, hello, everybody. I'm Randy Swift, co-chair here at Weedy. We've met many a time. I hope some new attendees have joined us today. And our goal today is to talk a little bit about ChatGPT and AI in healthcare. As you all might remember, we had a lawyer online last month for the call, and she outlined really well, some of the hidden challenges and obstacles that we need to watch for. But there were a lot of questions about, truly how does the program work? How does OpenAI function? And so I've enlisted Gary and AJ, and then Dr. Tripathi to join us and give us a presentation. So let me kind of introduce them real quick. So Gary Burt is the Vice President of Product Management and Global Product Development at Sutherland Global. Gary's focus is strategy, specializing in artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, Internet of Things, hybrid cloud, agile, and lean development. Gary has held positions at companies like Siemens, Atos, SS&C, Blue Prism, and Microsoft. Next is Ajay Jetty, is an Associate Vice President of AI Product Management at Sutherland. He leads a team that builds AI products of the future. The products his team designs has driven more than millions of dollars in client revenues across many verticals within the client base that Sutherland sells to. AJ has been a founder of 2 startups and held leadership positions with companies like Dell and Microsoft. And then, of course, last but not least, Dr. Vivek Tripathi is a board certified internist, and he has his MBA. He is the AVP of Digital Engineering for Healthcare at Sutherland. He is an experienced physician leader with over 18 proven years, really creating success within the value chain of healthcare, including payer, provider, med tech, and life sciences. Dr. Tripathi, he goes by Vivek informally, right, amongst all of us, has held positions with companies like Atos, HCL Tech, DXC Technologies, and J&J. He is also by default, something that he does on his own time, an internist with Doctors Without Borders. So we are very, very honored to have all 3 present to you today. There's about a 40-minute presentation is what they're planning on ChatGPT. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions. As always, during the presentation, if you do have questions, please feel free to post them in the chat section. And you can also raise your virtual hand, and I'll try to interrupt where I can to have you ask your question in person as fast as we can. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. If you wouldn't mind, whoever's driving, let's go to the first slide.
Okay, so just checking you can hear me okay? It's coming through okay?
We can.
So first of all, thank you to Randy, Ed, and Vivek for this opportunity to speak to you. The focus we're going to make is really on the practical side of this. Hopefully, there's not a lot of theory. It's going to be information that's going to be useful to you in your role. So before we start, a really quick disclaimer. Now, we did this talk internally within Sutherland, and going in the period up to that talk, we were changing this almost every day. So in the time that it takes us to write this and present this, the world can change. So this is correct as much as we can make it at the time of presentation. But seriously, AI, the world of AI and ChatGPT is changing very quickly, and we're going to come on and cover that. So the goal of the presentation is to provide you an overview and an introduction to generative AI and ChatGPT. It's not a deep dive. It's very practically focused to give you the information that you need to understand the basics, good and bad. It's in 3 parts. So an overview of generative AI, why it's in the news and why it matters. That's from me. My colleague Ajay with an overview of what's happening and really a practically focused approach of how you can use it in healthcare. And then back to me for really just to go over what are the issues with this and really finish with some practical guidance for healthcare professionals. We will take answers at the end. So if you have any questions, as Randy said, please put these in the chat. We will go through them all. You can ask pointy questions. We don't mind. If you want to challenge what we said, please do. We welcome that. We will share the slides and all the data points that we reference and all the statements we make are fully referenced in the notes so you can follow up with the learning yourself. We are going to go through some of the slides quite quick. And the reason is that we want to cover the breadth. As I said, that everything we share, so if we point to a news article, the links are all in the notes so you can go back and read those or watch the videos later. Okay, really quick one, let's get started. So what is GPT? So it's essentially a development of an AI model that allows it to generate human-like text. So the easiest way to think of this is it's a tool to generate information from information it already held, and it's on demand to you. So you can use it to solve problems, as it says, that typically require human involvement. Now, the key thing about ChatGPT is what it does is it makes available these really powerful models to a layman. So if we want to split the two, what GPT was a programmable interface that allowed technical people writing code to be able to use this. What ChatGPT does is allow lay people, everybody else, the general public, to use those capabilities. And really, one of the reasons that ChatGPT got a lot of interest is really, and we'll explain why, but it's because it's really blown people's minds in a lot of cases with what it can actually do and how powerful it is. And the reason for that is that behind the scenes, huge amount of effort, resource has really come together to make this, to the point where it's really getting very, very good. So without further ado, let's go on to some of the quick numbers. So ChatGPT launched into November 2022. So it's only a few months old. Now, it is based on technology that goes back to the 50s, ultimately, in terms of the development of AI. So why is it getting a lot of traction? Well, the first one is getting 10 billion of money from Microsoft, $10 billion of investment. That makes a lot of difference. And the other thing is that the reason this matters is that building generative AI, building those models, takes a huge amount of power. It takes a huge amount of, if it takes power, it takes money. So it takes a lot of compute. So what that's done is that's given Microsoft a real handhold or foothold right at the heart of OpenAI, the people who make ChatGPT. In terms of numbers, it had 100 million active users after 2 months. This is, even in the technology world, this is a phenomenal number. And a lot of those are non-technical users. So what we've seen, including my son, who's at college, and lots of his friends as well. Now, I'll come on to why this matters, but essentially it's got very wide adoption very quickly, and that's reflected in the news. In terms of revenues, there's a lot of big numbers being put around. $1 billion in annual revenue by 2024. I don't know. I guess my personal view is for Microsoft, they won't care. What they will care about initially is adoption. They will care about being first, and they will care about a lot of people using this in the market. So that's one of the reasons you're starting to see a lot of interest, because there's ultimately money behind this. When we look at the valuation of OpenAI, the people who make ChatGPT, when we last checked this, it was about 29 billion. So a lot of money, and that's made quite quickly. As I said before, oops, a bit too quick on the slides. As I said before, this comes back to technology that's been around for a while. So AI started in the 50s. We started to see the emergence of transformational AI models in, not that long ago, the end of the last century, and really starting to see GPT, the models that we have at the moment, really come to the fore about 6 years ago. So, but as you can look at the timeline, we look at here at 2020, GPT-3 took a big step forward in terms of what these technologies can do. And then again, we saw the announcement a few weeks ago of GPT-4. So it's still really recent, right? So why is it starting to make a difference? Why now has it started to do things that it couldn't do before? Well, one of the ways to understand this is to look at the complexity of the underlying models. Now, don't worry about parameters. A parameter is just a variable that's used to make the AI model. There's a detail in the slide that you can read and come back to. But essentially, it's a measure of the complexity and therefore, the comprehensiveness of the model. Now, let's go back to when GPT first came out, 2008, 117 million parameters. Now, you look at the numbers going through of the major releases. So 2008, 1.5 billion, 2022, 175 billion, and GPT-4, which was announced a few weeks ago, 100 trillion. We think they haven't released an actual number. But those numbers are huge, but let's put them in some kind of context. And we tried to come up with a way to show this and explain why it matters. So first of all, GPT-4 is a rough estimate for the number of neural connections in the brain. Now, we're not saying it matches the human brain, but what it does do is it gives a lot of capabilities that are human-like in certain dimensions. Now, if you look at these two dots, these are actually, I believe, drawn to scale. So on the left, you see GPT-3 from a few years ago, 175 billion, and then 100 trillion. So you see these absolutely massive numbers. Now, there's another way we can bring this to life of how big that increase is. So if we look at this, so look at the top left, that's a $100 bill. That's $10,000. I believe that's what it looks like. $1 million in $100 bills, 100 million, a billion. Okay, so remember that GPT-3 has 175 billion. So this is a billion. Now let's look at how we get bigger. This man here, that's a million. He's here. That's a billion. This is 1 trillion. So to give you an idea of the scale of these models, and remember GPT-4 is 100 times this size. So the scale of the power that it's got is absolutely phenomenal. And this is really critical, that a huge amount of money, effort, time, complexity has been put into these models. So why does ChatGPT matter? Well, that's really simple, because it's getting really good at tasks that we use to judge intelligence. So GPT gets an MBA. So it's already at the point where this was on ChatGPT. So this was pre-GPT-4. We then look at it. It's now using ChatGPT is allowed in the International Baccalaureate, which is an exam taken at 16. It's global, and they're now allowed to use ChatGPT in their essays as long as they declare it. And good luck finding it if they don't. And if they, finding the use of GPT is really, really challenging. And I'll come on and explain why. So what does the world think of this? What is the world saying about this? What is the business world? So this is a lady from one of the leading capital markets in the world. So Sonia Huang. And her quotation is really simple. Every industry is getting reinvented by AI. But let's listen to the words that she says. Now, hopefully you can hear these. If not, I'm going to skip over. So please jump in if you can't hear this. Hopefully it will play. No problem. We've got that technical fun again, that we test it, then it comes up and doesn't work. So what this is it's like 1 minute clip, and it just gives a really good summary. The link will be in the notes, so you can jump to that afterwards. It doesn't matter. Okay, so we talked about money. Now we talked about the GPT model driving OpenAI's valuation of 29 billion. However, this is a fraction of the money that the world is generally putting into generative AI models. So we look at the top number, and so we've got 3 different sources here, and we're seeing a really common trend. Huge amounts of money is going into this area. So venture capital increased investment to 2.1 billion in 2022, 500 billion. So this is the number to pay attention to, the one in the middle. It's essentially the global spend on AI solutions. It's absolutely massive, $500 billion. So what you see is just a huge amount of money and effort being spent in this area. Now, when we've talked about AI and when we talk about GPT and ChatGPT, We often think about it only affecting language, but it doesn't. It affects a lot more. So here's a quick summary. You can see text. Now, that text then gets broken down into marketing solutions, sales, writing solution, creative solutions, knowledge management, but also video, image, and code, creating code. So one of the things you can do with ChatGPT is you can ask it to generate code. So you could say, generate me an algorithm to do this in this language, and it will do that, and it will do it pretty perfectly, certainly as good as any competent coder. So this really starts to change things. Now, what does this mean for industry? Well, it means, I'll let you read the quote, but it's essentially saying this is now making a difference. Well, I'm going to come on to how that matters in healthcare, but essentially, Manny Maseda is the worldwide managing partner of Bain & Company. And he's saying this is going to affect the way that companies need to think about themselves. This is going to change the way that they work. But it isn't all good. There are problems. And even at this early stage, before it's been deployed, we're starting to see the challenges. Now, I don't know whether anyone saw this, but essentially, OpenAI, who make ChatGPT and funded by Microsoft, have been really grabbing a lot of the headlines. Google isn't far behind. They've got a lot of really smart people. They're looking at this as well. But what they did was they announced their competitor called Bard, and they did a public preview. The only problem was it didn't go that well. And in the few days, I think it was about a week afterwards, Google's market capitalization dropped by 100 billion. Now, when we look at the errors, these weren't catastrophic errors. This was, a couple of errors in terms of understanding the first. Let me think about what it was. It was the first telescope to take pictures outside the solar system. So what do you think? Well, you've got one, you didn't get the first one, you got the second to first one. 100 billion. Now, there's a really good lesson here, and that is that anything you do in AI is going to get a huge amount of attention. Now, we're going to come on to the challenges, but this error, and it's quite a little error in the big scheme of things, this really caused Google a lot of problems. They've had to put a lot of effort into correcting this, but it wiped 100 billion off their revenue because it gave a wrong answer in a promotional video. Okay, so let's move on to, start to move on to some of the practical things. We're going to bring it right into healthcare now. Just give Ajay a quick heads up. We'll be passing over to him in a second. So what's this for? Okay, so here's a quick challenge. Don't shout out, just think. There's no prizes. A tenuous introduction, guardrails. So one of the key things, and we're now going to bring it into the present. We talked about the background. We're going to bring it up to date and talk about this. So why are guardrails important? Okay, so the guy in the bottom right here, Sam Altman. So Sam Altman is the CEO of OpenAI. OpenAI make ChatGPT. GPT, again, funded by Microsoft. Now, whereas most tech CEOs have been really criticized and badly portrayed, Sam has been really praised by a lot of the legislators for two things. One, speaking very candidly and openly and truthfully about the challenges. And secondly, recognizing that this is an issue and we need to put the guardrails in place. So what he means by that is any technology, in particular one which has a big potential for impact, we need to not let it, we need to be responsible for this. We need to think about how can we use this technology, but ensure we can use it safely, which is where the concept of guardrails come. So remember on the last slide, the guardrail is the thing which stops you driving the car off the cliff. Now, we know that you're going to drive safely, but in some cases you get a problem, which maybe you're driving too fast, or it may be a tire blowing out. The point of the guardrail is to save you. And what Sam was saying, what Congress was very receptive to, is that actually we need to be thinking not just about the benefits of the technology, but about how we start to use that responsibly, how we start to make it safe. Now, I'm going to hand over to Ajay. He's going to talk about the practical uses, and then we're going to come back to me, and then we'll wrap it up, start to look at the some of the challenges, the opportunities, and then some practical ways that you can start to understand this in your organization. Okay, over to you, Ajay. I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Gary. Real quick, trying to share my screen. Hopefully you can see the screen. So as Gary was saying, there are definitely problems. I want to begin by saying that I read a quote yesterday that ChatGPT can help doctors and it can hurt patients. So I'm a firm believer that the human side of the equation is going to be very important, and all these technologies are here to help augment our capabilities, human capabilities, not to replace them. So real quick, I want to touch upon some of the capabilities of ChatGPT or generative AI in general, and see how some of these capabilities can be applied to healthcare value chain to solve some of the problems and assist the healthcare system in general. So if you're looking at my screen, these are some of the prompts. Prompts are nothing but text that you can enter. You can actually log into ChatGPT yourself, but if you have a Google login, it allows you to log in using your Google login. And as soon as you go inside it, you can enter text and ask questions, right? So for example, you can try some of these things like, what is the sentiment of the following text? And for example, give it an image and ask it to caption the image, right? And we will see how some of these things are useful in healthcare, right? Obviously, you can automatically tell that some of these things will be useful. For example, summarization is one of the most applied use cases right now, where you can take immense amount of data and ask ChatGPT to summarize that for you. We're going to see an example in healthcare space how that is useful. For example, image classification is another very widely used capability right now. As you can imagine, you can pass it an image of a dog or for example, let's just take an example of healthcare. For example, you can pass it an image of a diseased organ and things like that, and it can give you answers actually because of the previous learning that has taken place. So where ChatGPT in general can be applied, where there is no one correct answer, right? Creative applications, that's where it's very low stakes, meaning it's not like high stakes. And you generally would want to use it for such purposes. But if you are using it for high stakes, then you have to do a lot of engineering to make sure there are no hallucinations or problems. It doesn't give you results that you don't want, for example. It's also good when there is some tolerance for error. So that's why I said it can hurt patients and people if you directly let ChatGPT be your doctor, for example. It's also useful when the answer can be verified, because ChatGPT works on the data that it already has. So because it knows the answer already and the data, so it's very easy for it to verify what's already there. And also the last point is that when memory is needed, so that's the best part about ChatGPT is, for example, especially in a healthcare scenario, is that it can remember who the patient is and all the historical data, and then give you insights, for example, regarding the patient's health based on all that previous data, because it will remember it. So this is a quick example of,
Sorry, Ajay, just wanted to say something here, like on the last slide, if you can go back.
Sure.
So, gentlemen, and ladies, while you look at this and see the immense potential that ChatGPT brings to the table, these points 1, 2, 3, and 4 serve as risk criteria as well. While when you're dealing with healthcare, there is only one correct answer, and that's a fact-based answer, right? When you are talking of some tolerance of error in healthcare, there is zero tolerance for error. When the answer can be verified, while we are struggling with data and the quality of data in the healthcare value chain, the answer itself can be muddled up because the data itself is corrupt or it's incomplete. And of course, like we are talking of memory, but we are talking of tens and thousands of records and referential points and differential diagnosis when we try to talk about the memory side of it. So while we look at the great aspects and the great potential that this technology has to offer, these very same points serve as a risk criteria of whether we want to implement ChatGPT in its current form in healthcare. So just wanted to be a voice of reason. I mean, while we look at the potential and ways it can impact healthcare in a positive sense, we need to be very careful of where it can go wrong. Thanks.
And Ajay, this is Jyoti. On the same line, what Vivek pointed, like in the healthcare industry or in the insurance industry or even the banking industry, every member matters, right? Every transaction matters. We follow ACID. So yeah, you can do some projection, some planning based on huge data, and certain percentage of data get lost, no problem. But there are a lot of transactional data where every data matters. So we need to be a little cognizant about the use of ChatGPT. It's an immense, powerful tool, but yes, where it is applicable, how, and what is the guardrail, those are the things definitely we like to talk about eventually.
Hey,
Yes,
Stanley,
exactly.
Stanley, real quick, I see that you put the same similar question in the chat section. Do you want to make a comment regarding your question at the same time that these guys are talking about it?
Sure. Thanks very much.
Mhm.
I'm concerned about the security issues. How do we know, and how do you protect your AI engine from somebody getting in there and maliciously changing some data and starting to produce wrong answers? So that's one concern. I mean, the other concern is how do you differentiate between something that's AI led versus AI assisted?
So I'll take that first one. There is the slide that I'm going to end with that basically gives you a framework about how you go about using Gen AI, inside your applications, specifically healthcare applications. But you have to follow some kind of a process. There is a whole engineering process, obviously. But to answer your question, for example, you have to protect your data and you have to sandbox it. You have to follow protocols. So that's one of the number one steps. Is to protect your data, and you can also limit the amount of data that your model consumes, and train your models on limited amount of data so that it doesn't hallucinate or go out of context. The second, what was your second question? Sorry.
Whether it can be AI assisted.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The second part of it is that that again comes down to governance. I think how you plan to use it, right? And how you, for example, divide the problem that you have at hand, right? And make sure that certain problems where human is more important, for example, where there is no scope for error, you would augment, right? For example, I'm going to show you in the next screen how you can how it can be used to augment humans, and there might be certain tasks, for example, and that also we will look at one of my upcoming slides is for example, for generating transcriptions, for example, when doctors are dictating and things like that. There is no real one correct answer, but most probably 90% of the times the generated answer from the text will be accurate. So that's where you can kind of completely automate without any human intervention, for example. Hopefully I answered your question. So moving on, if that's okay. So just a real quick example of how it can augment. For example, it's hard for a doctor, for example, to read all the literature that exists on, for example, let's just say fat deposit, how exercise can regulate fat on the body, right? There's over 10,000 articles last time I looked about how exercise and body fat are related. I just did this experiment where I went to ChatGPT and gave it this NIS.gov article, which basically talks about how exercise can regulate adipose tissue, which is the fat in the body. And as you can see, it I just gave it the link, and it's giving me a summary of that entire page, which is very complicated. It has a lot of clinical results. It has a lot of mathematical data, experiments that were performed, and things like that. And it's giving you in plain English that how, the article first provides a background on the importance of adipose tissue in regulating energy balance and metabolic health. And then it goes on to highlight some of the research, what exactly the research said. For example, the authors highlight the beneficial effects of exercise on adipose tissue metabolism, such as increased lipolysis, the breakdown of fat, improved insulin sensitivity, and decreased inflammation. So this is an example of where, it can augment, for example, in healthcare. Gary already touched upon this. There are all kinds of industries currently, obviously using. These are the top 3 industries that are already consuming generative AI and building all kinds of different applications. Software engineering, obviously. ChatGPT, for example, has been trained on immense amount of data. It has been actually trained on software code. So it can read software code and know what exactly the output of the software code will be. So as you can imagine, in healthcare, there's all kind of entire healthcare, in fact, runs on software right now. So there's going to be immense applications on the back end using ChatGPT and generative AI. Marketing and media, obviously, again, another thing that every industry has. Even healthcare has marketing. And so we can utilize generative AI to generate text, videos, images, text to speech, speech to text, and things like that. And healthcare, obviously, we're going to look at this in deeper, but some of the use cases are analysis and prediction of diseases, summarizing physician notes, interpreting EHR records, drug discovery, cancer, and things like that. Moving on, these are a couple of Sutherland products. Sorry for the advertisement in between. That basically, can be utilized for healthcare applications. One is a conversational AI. For example, if healthcare billing and backend systems where customers have some issues, they can actually go to a chatbot instead of calling the insurance company or calling the doctor or the healthcare provider and things like that. Translation services, for example, you can provide services without borders, right? To different demographics of patients, remote patients. As you know, remote healthcare is now one of the biggest growing sectors in healthcare. And it is sometimes challenging because of the demographics of people who interact with the healthcare systems. So real quick, all these capabilities generally we believe can be applied to healthcare AI in these 4 areas, namely diagnostics, patient communication, lifestyle data insights, and clerical applications. Obviously, all with the underlying goal of improving patient outcome and increasing efficiency and speed and compliance. When I say diagnostics, means obviously you might all know is to diagnose the initial diagnosis of the disease, or enhanced identification and disease cycle prediction, to basically understand where the patient is currently, right, based on the given data that you have. So and this is where this is one of the areas Vivek will back me up, is ChatGPT is currently being used. For example, BioGPT made the news in Forbes and New York Times, and UCSD, where I live in San Diego, is currently using BioGPT to diagnose, for example, sepsis in patients by looking at their data. Patient communication, obviously, as I said earlier, marketing and media. So you can apply all kinds of generative AI applications to make patient communication very easy, all the way from providing them at home, for example, video messaging capabilities, which can then be transcribed and even fed into your EMR or EHR systems, so that doctors can actually look at all the look at how patient is, for example, doing, right, without actually going to the patient's home, for example. patient self-service, as I mentioned earlier. For example, patients can interact with various healthcare systems, without actually interacting with the person at the other end. Lifestyle data insights means you might be already using iPhone and all kinds of health apps. Apple iPhone comes with its own health app, and there's a range of health apps now, 23andMe and all kinds of genetic data, Wyome. There's all kinds of apps now people use in order to see whether they have some problem in their body and what exactly the problems are. They do that by simply, for example, most of 23andMe sends you a kit, and you can take a swab and return that kit, and then that data from the labs then goes into the app and the backend machine learning system that provides insights on what exactly is happening. So there's all these different kinds of apps. We can kind of combine them and put it in one place to generate a very holistic picture of a patient's health. Yeah.
Sorry, just one more thing. So, can you go back? I concur with what Ajay is saying, that there's a lot of focus on these areas when it comes down to healthcare, primarily because there's a lot of effort that has gone in terms of trying to see these work. Now, again, a word of caution. I like to be a voice of reason here, coming from the clinical field. Is the one key word here is right now is clinical collaboration or corroboration. Now, what that essentially means is, like, it can be AI assisted when it comes down to healthcare delivery. It cannot be augmented right now as it stands, and it cannot be the one who's dictating it on its own right. So it can augment, it can collaborate with an existing clinical fraternity to kind of make their jobs easier and more accurate, per se, avoid clinical errors as they stand today. One more thing is what that we have to be cautious of is basically while we are trying to mature the data sources and the predictive models themselves that will help us kind of get these areas to a shape where they can be readily used and can be deployed through AI. I would say I would still bring up that cautionary word of guardrails that Gary talked about, and that we'll be talking a whole lot when it comes down to healthcare, and we are seeing that with the legislations being introduced within US and globally as well.
Exactly. Thanks for that, Vivek. And clerical applications is where I would say, that's like, it's very high stakes again, but this is where you can augment your healthcare, without actually affecting a lot of patient outcomes. For example, increased self-service, solving billing questions that customers usually have when they struggle with insurance. For example, what their insurance cover, what can they not cover? These are very lengthy documents that generally people don't understand. They don't even understand their own plans, and there can be obviously frauds of various types on the backend systems. So and there's also compliance. There's a lot of stuff people have to do manually so that health and the entire system is compliant. So all these backend systems can be automated using generative AI and used to help augment the people that are already using this system and working on these systems. So these are a couple of I picked a couple of applications that are already making news. If you Google them, you will find them that are utilizing generative AI. For example, DocGPT, can automate a lot of writing that doctors have to do. For example, to generate letters and certificates, and even if you have to, for example, to get leave, people need certificates, right? And from doctors, and things like that can be used. For example, DocGPT can be used to automate such things. Similarly, Active Surgical is a application that analyzes blood flow and gives real-time insights to surgeons while they're probably probably before they are actually about to perform an operation, or maybe after. Similarly, BioGPT, I already mentioned, is being used to analyze, for example, it takes vast amount of biomedical literature and generates patterns and insights. In the end, the goal of that is to assist the doctor, right? A couple of applications. If you guys know what is Shark Tank, I've been watching a lot of Shark Tank recently. I've almost gone through all the seasons, and I came across this application called as Proven, which is basically this Korean girl. I think she came up with the idea, and it won the award for the best AI in healthcare at MIT. And so it basically came out of MIT labs. What it does is it takes all the literature that's available on skincare. It also consumes 10 million reviews of people actually writing reviews on skincare products, and saying, how their experience is. It basically takes all that information and apparently produces the most personalized skincare possible for a person, because people are different, right? And they're born in different places, and they have different kinds of historical health data, and their environment is different. So it takes all that stuff into consideration. In fact, I'm also building one of my side projects. Gary and other people know about it. Is I'm building a health app right now, which with the goal of doing something similar, where I consume all this data and try to summarize and extract insights out of all the available medical literature on various topics like health, sleep, and gym, and you name it. Similarly, I feel Doctors Without Borders is another area where this kind of generative AI can be used, because you don't know, because of historical data of where the wars are happening, the amount of people affected by it, what kind of healthcare they need, and medicines, and what kind of supplies is needed. All that can be predicted for future purposes also. So I would like to end by saying that, okay, you have all this, but if you want to apply this to your organization, you have to usually start by identifying use cases and where exactly you want to apply ChatGPT or AI, for example, inside your organization. Whether, for example, all those use cases that we listed, you have to prioritize them and see where the value really is, and then get all your data security, privacy, and make sure you get all those other things in place. Obviously, data is the most important thing, so you have to get your data right to make sure you don't have any unwanted results. And you have to get the human side of equation right. So, when I say that, that means hiring and firing, and having the right budgets, and training people on all these different applications that continuously come up, and make sure collaborate, basically, right? And don't do the work in silo. I'll stop there, and I'll hand it back to Gary.
Thank you very much.
So we've got, Gary, so we've got a couple questions, and I want to make sure that we get to them. Do you want to pause now and take a couple, or do you want to finish off and then open it up to
Give me
questions?
5 minutes, I'll zoom through, and then we can come back to the questions. We won't miss them.
Sounds
Okay.
good, Gary. Thank you.
Right, let me get to the right Zoom meeting, share the right screen. Apologies for this, but hopefully it means that you get the best of both of us. Right, there we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. We're going to zoom through these now.
In progress.
Just a reminder that all. Oh, I've got an echo. Sorry, can I just ask everyone to mute, please? There's an echo on my end. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to zoom through these, not because they're not important, but because all of the points I mentioned are covered in the slide notes. So when we look at AI, one of the things we should be absolutely honest, open, and transparent about, and some of these are mentioned in the chat, and this is the reason that I'll come back to them. There are problems with this, and as a if we label people as technical people as non-technical people, if you put yourself in the non-technical camp, or in fact the technical camp, do not be shy about asking these in really simple languages. So when we look at the technical issues, AI can get information wrong. It can get facts wrong. It's not guaranteed to get information right. So when you look at the use case, what you're using it for, it's really important to understand, and this was absolutely mentioned in the slide notes. Thank you, Stanley. So thank you for that in the chat. How old is the data that it's trained on? Now, ChatGPT stopped in 2021. So it cannot tell you about recent events. Now, Microsoft's Bing and several other search engines are addressing that. They may end up charging, I don't know. But it's really critical to know what was the data it was trained on and when was it stopped. How accurate is it updated? Because if you need information to be very current, the model needs to be updated. That brings a number of challenges itself. Second major one, bias. And bias is a really big challenge with AI models, because essentially it's not that the AI model is biased. If we get technical, what's biased is the human input used to build the model. So the data used to build the model is often reflecting and embedding human biases. So it's really important to understand whether there are biases in the solution. Now, the other point is to remember that AI solutions typically are continually learning. Now, they can be locked, so they learn up to a point, or they can be set to continually learn. If they can continually learn, they can be corrupted by bad actors. They can be, messed around with, to put it in a very honest but non-technical way. Yeah. So in the past, we've had examples of AI models being corrupted. I know there was a famous one of Microsoft releasing a chatbot a few years ago, and it was corrupted and essentially became a very obnoxious racist chatbot, because that was how it was being interacted with. It was learning from those interactions. So it's really important to be aware of these challenges. Hallucinations, these are, what it basically means is it creates something that just doesn't exist. Now, this is a very particular one for fraud, which is linked to the next one. So essentially, one of the things that you can do with an AI model is that you could ask it to use the information it has to create something that doesn't exist. So think of a deep fake. Nick, we're getting to the point where audio and video can be created that is really hard to spot. So one of the challenges is are we going to, we need to be careful and have the guardrails that we don't create something that can create something that just doesn't exist in the world. Fraud, we've already covered. Consistency. You want an answer to be consistent over time. Now, if a model's continually learning, will the answer get better in the future or worse? If it gets more data, will it come up with a fluffy answer, or will it get a better one? So these are really key questions to ask. Now, this, you could spend hours on this. Here's just a quick checklist. Ethics issues. Now, we have technical issues, but we also have ethics issues. So the first one, I'm going to zoom through these because the first couple are the ones that are most relevant. Privacy and security. I'm going to come on to those on a later slide, so we're going to zoom over them. But also there are issues of plagiarism. If you're sharing a huge amount of data and then using that to create something, who owns the rights to that creation? That original data that you used, or the fact that you used a chatbot. So there are challenges around that. This is what I really want to focus on now. Get into a common sense guide. I'm going to zoom through this. You've got all the slides, but we really want to cover a lot of content, so we want to keep it practical. All right, the first one. Automation is not AI, ChatGPT, GPT, etc. Automating a process does not mean we have to use AI. If we can, really simple rule for you. If we can write down the rules of how it works, then we can automate it now without AI. So when we look at coding codes, we look at automating appointments. We can do these without AI. So one of the things to do is when you start to get people talking to you about, oh, you should be using this technology, is it an automation technology and does it use AI? Because there's a lot of automation we can do to take away the legwork, to take away repetitive work that doesn't require AI. And that's, if you can define it, then it's, it's a lot safer. You're not going to have a lot of the problems that you have with AI. So one of the other bugbears that really frustrates me. So I came from an automation company before I joined Sutherland. Now, this looks a complicated slide. It's not. What it means is when we talk about AI, we often talk about the narrative being that it's going to replace humans. So the choice is humans or technology, like the top one. It's a switch. This misses a huge range of benefits. So instead of thinking of AI as a switch, you should think about AI as a slider or a dial. So we can use how we implement this, and we can use how we leverage that technology to help doctors and healthcare professionals. So, and this was mentioned earlier on, I think it was Stanley, but apologies if it wasn't. AI can help inform, it can help summarize complex records, it can help you plan things, it can review complex data. None of that changes the fact that the doctor, the physician, the clinician has their button on the final sharing submission of that. So should we adopt AI? We should adopt it where it's going to help the outcome, where it's going to help the patient and where it's going to help the doctor. Should we put it in place of the doctor? You don't need me to give you that answer. It's a lot more complex. And the answer is essentially you want to be asking some simple tests about that. So what are people saying? What are people saying about this? What are they saying about AI? Well, this was a great article in Forbes. Again, the link's there. And what it said was ChatGPT, as you would expect, raises questions of security, privacy, and bias. Two things I want to pull out of that. Firstly, generative AI is better at passing licensing exams, and each version gets better. Now, one of the things we need to just look at this and go, yes, we ask doctors exams, but we also get them to check patients. No AI system can put their hands on patients. There isn't an AI system today that's going to do a primary survey. The second one is that despite mounting evidence, the public is cautious. So you might be all in with AI, but actually we need to recognize that adults, Americans, and this is a global report as well, in the terms of, globally people are generally in the same position. People are cautious of AI. They're not anti, they're not negative. They just want to know that the doctor is in charge. And this comes back to that slider that when we look at how we can use this, one of the things to do is just recognize that at least today, patients want doctors to be the primary decision maker about their health. That doesn't stop doctors using AI to help them, but essentially they're holding control of that decision. And this is a really important one. Right, I tried to look at a really simple way of how do you understand and test the use case. What really matters as a doctor? What really matters to me as a patient? And I tried to make it as simple as possible as to how you could start to understand whether this is a thumbs up or absolutely no. And a couple of ways of thinking about this is to think of whether the thing that you want to deal with is complex and therefore it has a high risk, and whether it has empathy and you require humanity in the interaction. So this becomes really quite simple. If it doesn't require empathy or humanity and it can be defined, so it's low complexity, then automate it. At that point, it's typically not going to have AI. Again, if it's a high empathy function and it's particularly complex, now that could be process or it could just be the medical diagnosis, the medical complexity, then use a doctor. Don't focus on the area. The area you want to think about AI is not the top right. It's where it's going to help you and support you in that decision making. So really super simple, quick. I'm conscious of time. I'll zoom through this in 1 minute. This is the most practical advice I could come up with as a technologist with a lot of years, not a lot of hair, and a lot of gray about what I would say to a doctor and a physician around dealing with technology. The first one, always discuss this in non-technical terms. Even if you think you understand it, don't assume the technologist does. You might be talking to a sales guy who'll say anything and agree with anything to get this. So always discuss things in non-technical terms. Ask dumb questions. Ask really simple questions. Second one, this was really raised earlier on in the call by Ajay in the quote. How does this benefit the patient and the physician? It's okay that it benefits one, but how does it benefit the patient? Where does the money go? if someone's trying to sell to you, how do they make the money? When we talk about privacy, security, and bias, ask the questions really simply. What's the security around this? Can it be hacked? How do I know the data can't be modified? How can you prove to me it isn't biased? Following on from the congressional hearing, what are the guardrails? Now, social media didn't have any guardrails, and we've had massive issues with this. We can look at the issues around democracy. The US has had some questions, but we've had similar questions in Europe. There are a lot of developing countries that have had social media systems that have had really bad impacts. So asking security questions, asking around bias is absolutely valid. What are the guardrails? What are the issues around the guardrails? Are they there, and have they been robustly tested? And the final one is really, it's a bit of a fluffy one, and I'm going to reword this, I think, when I send the slides out. What this means is never use technology to undermine what should fundamentally be a human interaction. Okay, I don't want technology educating my kids. I want teachers to educate them. Why? Because it's a human interaction. Really simple point here, and this is the gold standard for me of pushback. I never want to hear that I have cancer. I don't want to hear it anyway, but I never want to hear that from anything other than a doctor in a face-to-face interaction. Now, AI might help understand it might support the clinician in doing analysis of the scan. It might help me in terms of understanding, treatment options, but I never want that interaction replaced. So the role of AI is simply to support the interaction, so I can have as much time with that doctor as is possible. Final slide. This is what we think. It will not replace humans. We don't want it to, but it will empower them and help them. So I'm conscious of running really tight on time, so I'm going to look at some of the questions in the chat. Hopefully I have answered some of them, but I will quickly zoom through. We will be showing the slides. The security issues. Stanley, ask absolutely simple questions around those. What is your security? How can you protect it? If your data is compromised, how do you know? How do you wind that back? So there's no single answer. What you want to do is check that it's secure and ask those simple questions. Tom asked about GPT-4 passing radiology boards. Yeah, the reality is that GPT and generative AI is getting better, and it's getting really good at passing exams. Yeah, we need to think of how we evolve exams to do the things and test the things that AI can't. Yeah, I'm quite happy for a doctor to score slightly lower on his exam and be beaten by AI if he absolutely aces the patient interaction in the physical exam. And I think we need to recognize there's a real positive for education, that actually we need to move away from testing things that can be easily repeated and learned, and move back to testing a whole range of things that matter around innovation, empathy, and underlying human intelligence.
I'd like to add there, and Tom, this is the answer from a clinician. There's only as much you can learn through an exam or the curriculum that we follow in our med school. The actual learning in terms of being a doctor comes once you get in the middle of patients, diagnosing them, learning, like honing your skills in differential diagnosis and whatnot. So even if an AI engine is able to ace the exam, getting it to a stage where it is able to kind of meander itself through differential diagnosis will be a long time coming.
Absolutely.
Right, exactly.
It's the same across a whole range of areas, because I remember I do judo many years ago. I worked really hard and got my black belt, and the statement that you hear is, I thought I'm an expert, I've got a black belt now. And a very senior downgrade comes up to me and goes, no, what you've done is you've reached the point where you really start learning. And I think it's same in medicine. So we completely agree about that one.
A couple of questions from, sorry, Gary, Janice.
Yeah, jump in.
Yeah, Janice, you asked about the summarization. Yeah, meaning GPT is very general. What you're looking at, like when you go to ChatGPT and ask questions, that's supposed to be a demo of what ChatGPT can do. But if you're going to actually use it inside your organization for a particular use case, you have to do a bunch of things. And there's data governance, there's processes and policies and things that you have to get in order before you train your model, and that's going to give you more accurate answers. So otherwise it's going to be a very general answer. You don't know, it doesn't know the context. For example, just to give you an example, there is something called as prompt engineering, and you have to which basically remembers all the answers from your previous questions and things like that, what you're doing, the previous outputs, and you have to kind of chain them, all of them together, to arrive at the right answer, and then actually embed that into your applications. Otherwise, yes, you might get all kinds of wrong answers. Hopefully I answered your questions. And on the same note, I read another question, Jyoti, I think, that about the data and ingestion of data and all these, whether data can be secure, whether ChatGPT can be embedded and sit safely on top of your organizational apps. Again, this comes down to the procedures and processes you will follow. It's not going to be something siloed, obviously, right? You're going to be designing these applications by taking all the different things into considerations, about your IT, all the way from your IT to customers to people and everything else in between. About who owns this, who owns this data and what kind of data, again, it depends on your application and use case, and you can limit that data, and you have to obviously have a sandbox, so yeah, it comes down to basically engineering. I know I'm giving very general answer, but that really is the answer.
Hey, AJ, thank you. I know we've kept everybody a couple minutes afterwards. I've captured all of the questions. We'll make sure that we try to respond to some of them that we didn't. I'd love to thank Gary, AJ, Dr. Tripathi, Vivek. You've been great. Thank you for your engagement today, everyone. Your input and your questions are very valuable to us at Weedy, as we all know, and we might have another session that will be more answer and questions versus covering more material in the future. So thank you again for your attendance and for your input, and everybody have a wonderful, wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.